Hey there, it's Ryan. Welcome to today's acrylic landscape lesson. Here we are going to take this blank canvas and we are going to turn it into something special. We are going to make some art and we're going to try to make it easy by listing all of the brushes and the tools, materials, the pigments down in the video description. There you can also find the traceable along with the real-time drawing video where I'm sketching out the traceable and talking about it. You can also get the ad-free version of the video you're watching right here, right now. So if you'd like to help support the channel and also get some helpful tools in the process, do go ahead and check that out. And with that, again, we are going to make something fun. I'm going to break it down. We're going to take it step by step. We're going to take it slow. We're going to relax into it. Let's grab the brushes, let's grab the pigments, and let's jump into it. Okay, so the goal here today is to render summer. The feeling of it, something that's warm and comforting, nostalgic, and you can see in this lovely little reference photo here that we have a beach in the background, some golden grass here in the foreground, something that you can again essentially feel through the sight of it, and that's the goal. So I'm really excited to start on this. It is an 8 by 10 inch canvas. You are more than welcome to work on a larger canvas should you want to, but I'm going to begin here today, as we typically do, with our 1 inch flat-headed brush. I'm going to dip the bottom third of it into a little bit of water. We're going to wipe that off. And the whole idea here is that our brush is now going to condense the bristles. It's going to keep our paint wet for a little bit longer, and it's going to make blending easier. We're starting in the background, as we typically like to, because in painting, I find it's much easier to work in the background and then slowly build to the foreground, layering your foreground subjects over your background subjects rather than having to paint around your foreground subjects while you're painting the background. It's just a bit more of an intuitive way of painting. But with that, we are starting back here. And it's difficult to see in the reference photo, but if you watched the color analysis video that I put up over on Patreon, we broke down the complexities in the color in the sky. We are going to paint with a warmer bottom, a bit of a cooler, more blue top, but it's all going to be incredibly subtle. It's going to start with an abundance of titanium white, a little bit of our cadmium orange, the smallest hint of our oxide black, and you can see I'm just grabbing it with the corner of my brush. You can barely see it, but that's because the oxide black and the cad orange are very strong pigments, and they will dilute the white very quickly. So we'll grab an abundance of this. You can see that I'm leaving quite a bit of titanium white still on the side, and we'll use that a little bit later, but this is a nice warm start for our distant sky. So we'll just work this all the way across. I'm not going to spread it too much because we make our job a lot easier if we leave a little bit of paint on here. It's going to make the blending process a lot more simple in the future. Then we'll add some extra titanium white to our mix. This is going to dilute the orange and the oxide black, make it a little bit less warm, but still quite warm, just like so. As you can see, I'm also painting over the drawing. That's a-okay. We can always go back and resketch it. I do have the traceable up over on Patreon, and I also have the real-time drawing video where you can see me do the initial sketch as well. Now here I'm just blending these two mixes together by softly going back and forth. And the real key to blending soft skies is applying as little pressure as possible. That way you don't get any streaks. Now we're going to mix the remainder of our titanium white into our mix. We'll put this right atop our current area. And I like to paint it on top before I mix, that way one side doesn't end up picking up the orange and then we move it to the top over here. It's just much more consistent if you go all the way across and then you blend them into each other. Now once we've done that, we're going to make our brush nice and wet, take off the excess pigment. We're going to grab our blue, and for me, I say blue, this is a turquoise green from Amsterdam. Alternatively, if you like Liquitex Basics, you can use a bright aqua green. Alternatively, if you like Winsor & Newton, you can mix a little bit of Cerulean Blue with a little bit of Sap Green. The idea here is that we have a bluish green. You have a lot of option as to which one you have. Those are just the ones I have at home, but if you have something different, feel welcome to try that. I'm going to mix it into our mix. I'm going to add a hint of our Oxide Black as well. We're going to try to mix up quite a bit of it. And we'll use this color in the water as well to make the painting nice and cohesive. But we'll start with it up here. There we go. Again, working it all the way across before we do any blending. I'll add some titanium white into this next mix, which will bridge our two pigments. And because our brush was so damp when we were working here, in theory it's still going to be wet and it's going to make that blending process really easy. Yeah, look at that. It's pretty seamless. We'll head on back up here. Beautiful. And I'll go over it a couple of times just to make sure it is nice and consistent. But overall, we have a clean gradient, we have a couple of colors, and I think we have a great start. Now, we're going to move on into the water, which again will use some of this pigment, but we're all going to use Cerulean Blue. Now this is from Winsor & Newton. This is something that I use in almost all of the paintings, if not an ultramarine blue. I typically like the ceruleans for bright sunny days, real blue skies, where I like the ultramarine for more cloudy, wintry, kind of cool scenes, right? This is more for the bright days. But we will add some Cerulean Blue to our palette, like that. And we want the water to be blue, but we want it to be a little bit green. So I'm going to mix these two together, but you are welcome to, again, mix a sap green or something like this as well. Really up to you. With that, nice to have such a quick, good start. Always motivating to enter the painting with some success. But now we are moving down here. I'm going to begin by grabbing a good amount of our Turquoise Green, about an equal mix of our Cerulean Blue. Now we do need to mix some Titanium White and Oxide Black into this. I could grab from here and here, but realistically I still have quite a bit here. So I'll just start the mix using what we have. That way we're not wasteful. It's okay if we get a little bit of the warmth and the orange in there too, because realistically this is going to reflect down into this to a point. And you can see how that just glides because we have a good amount of paint. That said, I think this is a couple of things. I think it's a little bit too dark, and I think it's a little bit too saturated when we look at the reference photo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this up, create a relatively sharp line that we can start working with. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to put lines of trees in front of a lot of this water, so if there's an area that's a little awkward, you can always paint over it with trees, but you can also go back and fix the horizon a couple of times later. We're just getting it started. The beauty of acrylics is that they're very forgiving, and these ones certainly are. Okay, now we're going to go back into our little water dish. We're going to, again, brighten this, desaturate it. Luckily, titanium white will do both of those things at the same time. There we go. Now we'll just start underneath, start blending it up. Here's a bit of a closer view for you. Already I think it looks better. And I do want the back of the water to be a little bit darker than the front, so this isn't a bad thing even. Kind of convenient that it all worked out the way that it did. And you can see that there's a bit of a hard line breaking up this area of water and this area of water. I'm not going to do this yet. We're going to paint it very differently. I always get asked the question, how do I paint a mountain? How do I paint water? How do I paint this or that? And the answer is often that it varies pretty dramatically based off of the perspective, how close or far you are away from the subject, what time of day it is, the surrounding lighting. There's a lot of different factors that go into it, and here it's going to be different to the point where we paint it with an entirely different technique. So right now we're just starting simply like so. You can see I'm working it back and forth, try to get it as consistent as I can. There are a lot of little waves in this water, which we are going to implement, but we start with something nice and easily manageable like this. Beautiful. Now, I think mine is significantly more cerulean blue heavy than it is our turquoise green. So if you want, you can even just grab pigment and work it in. It's it's definitely the most risky way to go about painting, but it can work. It is working here, making it much more green. It's also darkening it a little bit because the turquoise green is a darker pigment than the mix that we had on the canvas. So you might want to remix more titanium white back into it. But to be honest, I think I'm pretty happy, and we're just going to do a little bit, just a little bit of extra titanium white. Love painting water because you get these very cathartic periods where you're just doing a lot of horizontal strokes, working on gradients. It's very soothing. I think a lot of us paint for that reason, and it's a great subject to paint for a calm period. But I like this a lot. Now I think we're going to start working in some little waves, and these, as you will see, for the most part are done with highlighted almost white, but it's not a pure white. It does have some warmth, especially in the background from the sky, and so we'll incorporate that, but we also need to incorporate the shadows at the bottom of the waves. The way waves work is that it's water that rises and then falls. And when water rises, it gets less dense. There's less of it towards the top than there is at the bottom. And that means light can move through it much more easily, which brightens it dramatically, and it makes the bottom area look a lot darker. So when you're painting waves, often the best place to start is actually at the bottom, creating the shadows. And then you build up and up and up in the wave until you get to the real highlights. So here, what we're actually going to do is we're going to make a little bit of a darker mixture of what we've used. So I have quite a bit of my Oxide Black, quite a bit of our green, bluish teal, whatever you choose, Cerulean Blue. That's a beautiful color. That's a really beautiful color. A little bit of titanium white too to desaturate with the Oxide Black. We'll still keep it darker than anything we have on here. And then I think I'll actually apply it. You know what, I will apply it with this brush. We'll do little horizontal markings here and there. And then we'll blend the bottom of it out into the rest of the water. None of it has to be perfect. Water is always moving in unique ways. We're just trying to create the back and forth look of shadows and highlights. I'm going to go over the areas that I really want to be dark a couple of times because it is blending with the brighter pigments, and that's making all of these applications brighter than they are on the palette. You can see there's a dramatic difference between this and this. So we go back when we want it to be a little bit more prominent. Little ones towards the background. This is really easy if this is still wet. If not, you just use a little bit more water in your mix, and then things will start to move around much more softly again. But for now, as you can see, we're able to just press this in, do a little blend. And if you add too many of these darker areas, if you're not, because it's always as simple as just going back in with the highlight and reworking that too. We have very subtle water, very subtle waves right now. I like that. It's a sunny, carefree, beachy scene. So you don't want it to be too dramatic. One of those things where you could add a lot of contrast and detail, but in a setting like this, often less is more. We're just doing little waves towards the background. They should be a lot bigger in the foreground, a lot smaller in the background. In the middle of the waves, I'm going back and I'm adding more of the darker mixes. Waves should get smaller as you move farther away. I'm also trying to build some of them off the side of the canvas, because if they are all in the middle, it'll look a little unnatural. Now, admittedly, I haven't made it to the beach yet this year. I really want to. And I think part of the reason I wanted to paint this one so much is because I wanted to go to the beach. And I find when I really want to do things, and I really want to go places, and I don't have the time, the opportunity, I paint them instead. And then I get to kind of live in that idea, that atmosphere, and it makes me happy. But I think this is a great start. I think this is a really great start. Beautiful. Okay, so at this point I'm going to wipe off the excess pigment. We're going to zoom you a little bit out. We're actually going to let this dry for a minute, because working the highlights onto this wet pigment will be very difficult. And when you want things to be quite bright or quite stark in one direction or another, it's a lot easier to work on a dry canvas. That way you get less blending, less muddy potential pigments, and you can create those opaque pigments that you can see on your palette on here. Because again, if you look at these colors and you look at these colors, and then you look at this, nothing on here is as bright as what we have here, and nothing is as dark as what we have here. It's all softer blends in the middle, and so when we want those stark waves, we have to wait a little bit. So we'll do so. And in the meantime, I might get a little bit of water. Friendly reminder to you, stay hydrated, and it'll make the whole painting process a whole lot easier. Okay, so we're back. Things are nice and dry, and that means we can start working on some of the highlights. So for this, I think everything on the palette is dry. I am wrong. You know what? That's actually good. We can use this. I'm going to take some titanium white. I'm just going to make a brighter version of the highlighted blue that we had in there. And we're progressively going to build this up and make it brighter and brighter. Now, this, as you can see, has a little bit of that blue in it. That is not a bad thing. And we're going to start actually applying it onto the canvas with one of 3 brushes. You can use a liner brush if you want real precision. You can use a smaller flat-headed brush if you like the general sharp edges that can render. This can actually be great for waves. And if you want really soft, fluffy waves, then you can use a filbert brush. I think I'm going to start with the smaller flathead, and then I might switch to the liner a little bit later. That said, we are going to make this nice and damp. We'll grab our pigment as we do. And then I'm going to look for the bottom of these dark areas. I'm going to go to the top of them where they get to be the brightest, and that is where we apply the paint. So it'd be right there. Over here you can see it's really dark here. We move up, here's the brightest spot towards the top of the darker area. And that means this is in fact where we apply. So we just work the little bit of the top of our wave here, and that wave doesn't just exist at the top. It starts to come down, right? The water goes up and then it crashes down. And now we drag the bottom of this marking downwards, softly at first. We try to make it a bit randomized. So some areas are a little bit more down, where it's more up here and it's more down, but the top of it remains really sharp. That's important. We can go over here, do that as well. And you can see that the waves aren't completely straight. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. Variance is so, so important. And then we're, again, doing our little drags, having it roll out. Sometimes you can see that darker pigment through it, sometimes you can see it underneath, but the whole idea is that it's never too predictable. There we are. And like so. Comes together so quickly once you have the general ideas. You can see we're jumping around a lot. We have this in the background, but these are going to be a lot smaller in the background because we're just going to see less detail that far away. And when you find it gets a little too tricky to use either the flat-headed brush or the liner brush in the distance, that's when you put this down. We pick up the liner brush. As you can see, the bristles are very spread out because it's dry, but once we make it nice and damp, wipe off the excess pigment, it's so sharp, so clean, so easily maneuverable. You can create these really minute markings into the background. Okay. Beautiful. We'll go back to it. You don't have to do that many waves, but it really is up to you. I think a couple more. I don't want it to be too many, but I also want it to be enough that it looks realistic, right? I think realistically we have quite a few. Towards the back here, I have a very watery mix, and I'm just doing perfectly horizontal lines. You get more of the bumps and the movements towards the foreground because you can differentiate the changes because it's closer to you. You can see them, but as you move into the background, you can't see that much detail because it is so far away, and it kind of becomes these more basic horizontal markings. But there is a transition as you move that way. We can also take the liner brush here and start doubling down on some of the sharper markings towards the foreground. Make sure that they are nice and clean. Make sure that you have some, again, that go off the sides of the canvas because that'll make it look much more natural as a whole. There we go. I like that a lot. And from here, we need to continue building on these waves. We need to give them more details, more character, more individualization, and we can do so by taking our larger flat-headed brush, making sure that yet again it is nice and damp. We're going to brighten the mix that we have here. So that's just initially interjecting more titanium white, spreading that well, and then we're actually going to add a hint of our cad orange in here, because we do have the warm light from the horizon working its way in, and that will impact the hue of the wave. This will also create a differentiation between the past layer and the layer we're about to create. So, look at that. Already distinctly different, distinctly brighter. And you're going to need to do quite a few layers of highlight because acrylics are innately semi-transparent, and as they dry, they typically dry a little bit darker than when they're applied, when they're wet. So if you want really bright applications over darker areas, you probably have to apply it a couple of times, and eventually you get there. But it's kind of nice because it gives you time to really sit with your decisions, see if you want to double down on areas, make corrections if you want to. It gives you a lot of leeway for correction. Another one of those reasons why acrylics are just so forgiving as a medium. A lot more of this in the foreground where you can really see the highlights popping. There we go. Now again, the water is going to be falling and rolling, so we can have some of these highlights rolling down. And then we can kind of connect some areas from the top and the bottom, like this. That way it looks like the wave is coming down, it's crashing, but there are little openings that you can see into. If you work on a really big canvas, you can do a lot of sharp details in between. Smaller canvases, it's a little bit more ambiguous, which is fun. It can be a bit more painterly this way, aesthetically. But If you want hyper realism, again, working on a big canvas is almost always the right call. And the techniques don't really change, so you just be doing this, but more, and it just take a little bit longer, which is okay. We're all here to paint because we like to. It doesn't need to be quick. Though I have been thinking about bringing back the 10-minute painting series because I have a couple of ideas and I just thought it would be fun to work on something in a way that's nostalgic. I don't know how many of you have been here since the 10-minute painting days. That's kind of how the channel started, really. We did a lot of these quick paintings, which I love because they let us figure out our color palettes and our compositions quickly without the big commitment, and then the paintings that I really liked I could double down on and then make the really big versions of them. But I think it's great for practicing, creating studies, and making things like that. If you've been around since that time, tell me in the comments. Very curious how many of you started watching at that point, because it has been years, but again, nostalgic. Really like what we have going on here. Remember, this will be water too, we're just going to paint it differently. The water come and roll down. Multiple layers, build it up. Add a little bit of this warm highlight into the highlight in between. And then I think we create a new, even brighter pigment, more titanium white than before. Not a pure titanium white, we still want some of the orange in it, but something brighter. And then you can apply this to the tops of everything you just did. Not all of it, but a fair portion. I'm also trying to build a little bit of texture into the tops of the waves, so I'm leaving paint unmixed and unmoved. Acrylics dry a lot smaller than they're applied, so they shrink by about 30%, but that's okay. As long as you have a little bit of texture, you can tell. It also isn't necessary, I like the look with waves. And remember, if there are parts that you don't love, it's okay, because we'll be painting trees over a lot of it. Stress-free painting sessions. Just good little relaxed painting periods for all of us. Now, we could continue working on this area right here, and there's definitely more room for detail. However, A, we need to let this dry. B, I do want to work on this next section of water right here. And we're going to do this by actually not painting water in the beginning. We're going to paint sand, and then we're going to cover it with water. Because as we get closer to us, the water gets less and less thick, and eventually when it's very thin, you can really see through it. You can see the sand, and because we have this nice warm hue in here, we can essentially render a nice warm hue that matches it down here. It'll bridge the top of the painting with the bottom of the painting, really creating a cohesive feel, and it'll also create this really nice transparent, non-opaque look, which adds A, a lot of depth, but B, a different aesthetic than what this water presents. So it complexifies it in a nice subtle way. With that, we do need to put down a subtle layer of sand, completely let it dry, and then start to paint. And to do that, we're going to grab an abundance of our Cadmium Orange, our Titanium White, our Oxide Black. Luckily, this is not complicated. We need more Titanium White. Getting there, it's still a bit saturated. I'm just going to reach over, grab even more of our white, There we go. Mix that in. This goes to show that you don't go with the first pigment you mix. You keep mixing until you get what you really want. We'll go again. Okay, that looks pretty nice. I like that a lot. So with this, we're actually just going to keep it quite easy. We'll apply that like so. Bring it almost all the way to the top, creating a very nice thick application, like so. And then towards the top, I think we'll grab a little bit of our green if that's still wet. It's not quite. You know what? We'll grab some Cerulean Blue, hint of our green teal, just a little bit of this. I'm going to run this towards the top, like so. Because as we get farther and farther back, this is going to get deeper and deeper, right? And eventually you do lose the sand, but this is what we blend into. And this isn't us painting the water. We haven't done that yet. That'll happen in a step soon. But for now, we just need a little bit of a transition. We're going to eliminate all of the white of the canvas between this section and this section, like so. There we go. Do a little bit of a blend when we can. Bring one into the other. And while this doesn't look, you know, it almost looks like the water's just hitting the sand and there isn't a transition. So it doesn't look bad, but we are going to make it look a lot better once it dries. We just want to give this a little bit of time. So we're going to take a break there, and I'm going to start cleaning my brushes and my water because, as you can tell, they're both pretty diluted at this point, and we want to be able to work with clean pigments. So we'll clean this, we'll clean that, and then we'll jump back into it once this is dry. We're back. This is all fully dry to the touch. We have our clean brush, clean water, and we are ready to get back to this. So I'm going to make sure that my brush is nice and damp, and then we're going to render a very thin tealish blue to work on top of here. So I'll grab a little bit of the teal. All this should be fully dry. We'll grab some titanium white, grab a little bit of our cerulean, just like that. Again, the goal is a good mix of all three, and then we'll move it to a clean spot on our palette, and we'll make it very watery. So we want it to almost feel like watercolor. You can now see through it on the palette. We're going to head up here, and we're going to apply it towards the back to begin with, like so. And then we're going to slowly work it forward, letting the water and the pigment dissipate as we move down, like so. Now we have the sand showing through, quite simply, more so in some areas than others, and that's how we want it. But this is essentially sand, water that's much closer to us, where this is much farther away. Also, because we just added so much water to the canvas, this is all blendable now very easily. So what we can do is we can render a darker wave pigment to go as our separation piece, which is, you know, for the most part, our cerulean blue, a little bit of our teal, oxide black, a little bit of titanium white. Want that to be a bit more saturated than it is. And you can see we almost have a perfect mix with our previous darker hue. And now we can work this all the way across, because in the foreground the waves will really stretch. It's not going to be a big wave, it's just going to be a little one. And we can even blend this out and down because everything is so wet. So we're going to have a very soft base where this works into the water. We're going to go back on top of this and do a brighter wave, but that's really just where we begin, and it's a good start. So Now what we can do, again, while this is wet, is render a bit more of a washy wave look towards the forefront. We'll grab some of our titanium white, work that into the pigment we were using down here, make a much brighter color that still retains the blue, and then we'll switch on over to our liner brush, make that nice and damp. We'll head to the closest area to us, and then we'll do a little, oh, that's a little too much water, one second. Closest area to us, and you know what? This might just be a little too watery to work on right now. That does happen. Sometimes you just build up too much and then you can't get anything distinct. Here we have a little bit. I'm using a lot of paint though, so it's risky. But the idea is you create lots of little horizontal markings which occasionally work together, and then as you move up they get smaller, they dissipate, and you just have the idea of them. Let's see if we can do a little more as this dries in real time. We're starting to get there. What's kind of fun about not having the stark markings initially is I almost have a practice round to make sure I like what I'm doing. I'm just kind of playing with movements. There we go. This is fun. Okay. Little bits left and right. You can see I'm taking it pretty slow. I'm okay with a lot of this being semi-transparent for the first application. I'm doubling down on the areas that I really like. But it feels like you just have this water washing up on the shore, kind of gets lost towards the background a little bit. The closer you get to us, the more sand is revealed. Much more noticeable up here because, of course, it's against a darker backing. The more contrast you have, the easier it'll be to see. So far, so good. Okay, now we can add to this or we can let it dry, but I think this is dried for the most part. It has, so we can actually go back to rendering more of the waves at the top. A little bit of our teal, a little bit of our orange, a lot of our titanium white. You can even apply it with this brush because it is so much just straight across. Probably a bit too much orange there, to be honest. Do a new mix. A little bit more titanium white heavy. And we're just working this all the way across, being pretty sharp with it. If there's anything really notable about this application, it's that it's not perfectly straight. A lot of ups and downs. But now you really feel like it's rolling through. I like that a lot. Said that was big strokes with a big brush. We will need to refine. And luckily, we have our liner brush ready to go. We'll have some of our water just coming down as we've done before. Little portions of the wave that find their way towards the base. Very good. Work that back up. Back down. It's a lot of back and forth trying to find the bridging, because the water doesn't come down at every point. I'm looking for the natural dips and doubling down on those. There are areas that definitely stay a bit higher. I feel like I lost all of the darker pigment there by accident. We can just remix a little bit of it, rework it in. Beauty of acrylics, just so malleable. There we go. See? Nice and easy. We can even take this and work it down and kind of go back and forth like we did with some of the more white mix. Now in the traceable that we have up over on Patreon, there's a second line for a second wave. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to give it a shot, see if I like it. If we don't, that's okay. We always just cover it up, but you know, I thought we'd explore the idea. So I'm taking more of that highlight pigment, going to work it right here. Just have it run across. Imperfectly. That way it looks natural. And then we can do little blends down. Like so. Again, not necessary. But you're not really going to have a lot of shadow underneath because there's not a mass amount of water that can create something that would require shadow. I think with that there, I want to go up and do a little bit more design work with the little white waves. I like it. I think we grab additional titanium white. Most of this is diluted with the orange, and I want something a bit more clean, a little bit more neutral. So grab that, we'll work it a little bit into the orange that we have, but not too much. There's highlights to the top. When I come back up, fix these up. So far so good. Like that. The line initially, a little simple, but you know, we keep working on it until we find our way, and we are in fact finding our way. Okay, so far so good. Now, something I did, which I'd actually recommend avoiding, is there's equal amounts of space between here to this wave to this wave, this wave to this wave, and this wave. So there's a lot of repetition in size where you probably want some areas to be a lot longer than others, just for the sake of creating that visual diversity and making it look a little bit more natural. Sometimes when things are a little too perfect, they start to move out of that direction. Not something you have to do, nothing I'd really worry about, but you can go into it with that thought. I drew the traceable in a certain way where this was actually higher, so it created one amount of space, two amounts of space, and then a third different amount of space. But when I put this in, I put it in the middle, which was my mistake. I did so that I could retain more detail up here. And I don't think it looks bad, but I do think it would have been more correct to create variance in the amount of spaces that I have between my waves. Now there's a workaround. I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of the bottom here, but just for the sake of showing you how I'm going to fix this on mine. And again, it's not a big deal. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to worry about it. But just little things we can learn and work on together. I'm remixing my sand color, as you can see. That's step number one. I'm going to apply it right under all of our water. We'll blend that up. Blending it up through little horizontal strokes, back and forth. That way it feels like it fits within the rest of what we have. It of course will be the color of sand, where everything else is sand with a little bit of water on top of it, but that's okay. We waited for it to dry last time to add the blue on, but I think this time we can probably just work it in, get a pretty similar effect. Different ways of doing this. There's rarely ever just one way of painting something. Plethora of techniques. It really depends on your painting style and how you like to create. But that said, once we have the sand extended, I will keep that. We'll create more of those little tiny waves that go back and forth. So to create a variance of scale between waves, I took out a little bit more of my ground and foreground, but that's okay. I think the real magic in this piece is walking out of this path and seeing this wonderful beach, this water. I think there's this real feeling of success and excitement there, but also relaxation. I want to double down on that, so we're just going to drop this down a little bit more. In painting, you really want to focus on the feeling, and you ask yourself what subjects, what colors, what line work, what shapes help you achieve that, right? And here, the main goal is summer. You really want it to feel like that warm, daisy summer day. You're just wandering around, looking for the beach. You finally find it, and it's this real bliss. There we go. I like that a lot so far. See? What wasn't a mistake in the end. We were able to turn this into something really cool. Quite lovely. Cover that up just so we can see what it'll look like once we have sand, water, and grass. I think that looks great. Okay, so we're going to say this much is good for now. We can definitely go back and we can touch up elements of this grass and make it more and more concrete. But for now, I think that's good. And at this point, I think we move on to the next step. Okay, so I think we're just about ready for the next step. And this will be fun because we are going to cover the remainder of the canvas. Now, typically, as we talked about, I like to begin in the back of the painting and then slowly work my way forward towards the foreground. However, we're doing things a little bit backwards here, in that there are going to be trees which are essentially in front of the land here. So in theory, we should paint those first so that we can paint the land over top. However, it's very simple to just paint extra grass afterwards on top of the bottom of the trees, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But the reason I want to start with this and do things a little bit less intuitively is because we're going to have our greens down here and our green golds. We're going to have those warm greens up here as well. Now, we have to cover this area with those colors, so it's mandatory down here, but we don't have to do that much up here. And I need these, the top and the bottom, to balance each other well. Now, to figure out how much we can do up here, we'll have a much better idea by doing this area down here. So we're starting with this, despite the fact that it'll make layering a little bit more tricky, because it'll give us a much better idea of just how much foliage we can put in the top. I hope that makes sense. We'll demonstrate as we go, but with that, I am going to take artistic liberties with the amount of foliage that we have in here and the way that it's presented, because again, I want to open up the middle to a greater degree. And we also moved the land down just a little bit as well. So a couple changes, but all of which I'm excited about. With that, we are going to take our larger flat-headed brush. As we do, we're going to have grass on both sides. I'm also implementing a little bit of a trail in the middle. The trail will do for the most part with our orange, but for the grass, we will grab Sap Green for the first time in this lesson. Move that over to a clean spot on our palette just so it doesn't get visually confusing with any of these under it. We'll grab some Oxide Black to make it dark, grab a little bit of Sap Green, and we want to mix a neutral green, nothing too dark, nothing too bright, something we can put shadows on but also highlights. We'll grab a little bit of our Cadmium Orange to interject some warmth into the sand. I like this. Not too dark, not too bright. Maybe a little bit more titanium white. And then we'll just very quickly, very easily work this onto the canvas. Now, it's going to look pretty rough upon the first applications, and that's okay. We're just painting base layers. We're simply working on foundations. We will expand upon all of this quite dramatically, quite soon. Like that, like that. I'm also not worried about the area in between because we are going to paint in there roughly as well and build that up. And right now we just kind of have an opportunity to play with how we want it to move around. In theory, we could also cover all of it. But I like this as a base. Now we'll grab more of our orange, Oxide Black, Titanium White, maybe some of our Cerulean Blue to desaturate and darken our orange. They're complementary colors, which means that when you put them together, they desaturate each other. They become a little bit more grayed. Not a bad thing. Not here anyway. If we want something a bit more subtle, we can add little patches of open ground to the side. We can do little blends into the greenery. We can grab more green and work that in there too. There we go. We don't want a hard edge. We don't want it to be too soft. We want something kind of in the middle, and the colors work really well together. You can see how almost ambiguous that is visually. That's really nice. And then we're just going back and we're making everything nice and thick. You can see that the line itself isn't too straight. There's ups and downs, and I can also tell on the camera that it's looking a little dark. Let me brighten this for you. There we go. There we go. Yeah, I think that looks great. Okay, now I think what we'll do from here is we can let it dry and then we can go back in with our textures. And I think that's the easiest way of going about it, probably the most correct way. I know there's a lot of little start and stop breaks in the lesson here, but that is really just one of the I guess benefits to acrylics, in that it is start and stop, but the stops are so brief. It's one of those things where you can go and you can get a snack, you can get some water, you can say hey to the family. It's really nice in flows, and I feel like because it works in those flows, you don't necessarily feel like you're spending too much time here, because you're also getting other things done, and that's always nice. That said, I think by the time I mix my next pigment, this will be pretty dry, so I'm actually going to continue, and we're going to render a darker pigment for the base of our grass. So for this, I'm going to grab more of my green, a little bit of our Oxide Black, just like so. We can grab some of our Cerulean Blue to make the shadows a bit more cool. I love that color. It's not quite a black. It has a little bit of blue, it has a little bit of green. It's a very organic, cool, darker pigment. And we're going to apply it with our fan brush like this. We're going to keep it dry. If you have a stiff and a soft bristled fan brush, I'd recommend using the stiff one, because you want your bristles to remain individual. That'll give you significantly more markings. That said, we will grab some of our pigment, both sides. We're going to apply next to no pressure. And we're just going to, as you can see, create hundreds of these grass impressions so quick and easy. In the distance, they're going to be really small, and then as you get closer to us, they're going to get longer and longer. I'm trying to put some on angles. It's not a windy day, so I'm not putting them on the same angle. They're kind of just drooping to different sides. But if you want it to be a windy day, you should have them all moving in a similar direction. I'll get you a bit closer for the detail work. So here we are, yet again. Again, far away, it's these little markings, not well extended, but then as we get closer to us, much longer, bigger. Ideally, you work from the top to the bottom for the sake of layering them on top of each other and it looking nice and natural. But you don't have to. I'm also not always using the entirety of my brush. Sometimes I'll use just the edge. Then I'll go to the other edge, and then maybe I will use the middle. But I'm trying to diversify how these are being applied. And it'll give us a stronger painting in the end. Okay. Lots of little taps. Accidentally putting it out over the water, that's okay. We will extend our grass up anyway. We can put some of our grass into the sandy areas. And I think I just need more pigment for here. Again, this will look a little rough in the beginning, and that's okay. It's still just a base layer. We're going to build on this in so many ways. But this is a necessary start to the process. I'm going to do a bit more over to the corners to create some vignetting. Just draw the eye in closer to the actual painting. There we go. Couple little taps in the water. Beautiful. Couple little taps out into the sand. And these are just taps. This is just to build texture. So with the grass, it's a drag. With the sand, it's a tap. There we go. I like that. Just the beginning, but a strong one. So we are back. It is a brand new day, and that means everything here is completely dry, everything here is completely dry, and we are going to continue working on this. Now, this is where we're going to add in a lot of warmth and light, grass that really stands out and captures that spirit of summer. We begin with our Sap Green, intuitive. It's grass, it's green. We need it to be quite warm. So we're going to start with about a third of that in our Cadmium Orange. Beautiful. We'll add in some Titanium White. And you have this golden green. We can brighten it up more. And now it feels a little bit like dry grass. And that means we can't make it too bright while retaining its saturation. So I'm going to go back and forth, re-instigating the greens and the cad. And I think this is a beautiful first step. We can do multiple greens, but I love how warm this is. I love the saturation. I'm just very much a fan. And I think that's important. When you mix your pigments, you want to like what you have on your palette, because what you have on your palette is going to be, for the most part, what you have on your painting. Now we're going to go back to our fan brush. It is completely dry, not wet. This is where you would also, again, use a stiff bristle fan brush. In the background, remember, it's more of a tap with a little bit of a drag. And then as you get closer, you can instigate more and more of a drag. Here you can see I'm doing little bends with the brush, here and there. Trying to create more and more variance as we go. Now there may come a time where you have too much pigment on your brush, and because of that your bristles condense. It becomes difficult to get the randomization and the individual strokes. If that's the case, you do wash your brush and then you dry it thoroughly so it's nice and stiff again. And all of the bristles are individual. That's the most important part. There we go. Lots of great grass. See that? Nice and easy. We can go back and we can add more, but it's probably best to let that dry before we do. That way we don't move around the pre-existing pigment. Now I'm going to move this around a little bit more, make sure that it's still nice and wet before we jump into the other side. We'll make sure that our bristles are still good and individual. And then we head over here, starting at the top. Very short applications, starting to move down. You can also make your grass more condensed towards the back, so less of an opening in between your applications. Where when you get closer to the foreground, you want to create greater distance between them, because perspective will let you see downwards and in between these openings to a greater degree. Now this is probably dried a bit, so I can head back over here. Add a little bit of that grass out into the main area of the path. Again, more grass towards the back, tighter, like so. Then it opens up towards the front. This was so quick and easy. Just try to remember that your grass does progressively change throughout its journey here. Now I'll go back and I'll do a little bit more through here. Beautiful. Little hints of the green poking out. And we probably want to add more highlights into this grass, greater variance. But we need it to dry, and in the meantime we can take our liner brush, make sure it is also nice and damp, grab some of that pigment, and we can do individualized little strokes to help fulfill the larger idea. You want to make sure these are very tiny, very, very tiny. The smallest strokes you've ever made. You've probably made smaller strokes, but these are pretty tiny. There we go. Trying to make it more natural by interjecting more and more of the greenery into the middle. We can try to get rid of that harsh line in the background as well, by going over it with lots of little taps. And from there, I think that's actually really, really nice. I don't know that we need to do much more with this pigment. Just doing tiny touch-ups. You don't want the grass to be large in the background, by the way. You want these strokes to be really tiny, so be careful with this, that you're not doing the elongated strokes that you do in the foreground. You can also have your grass overlap in the foreground. That can be a nice look. Easy way of complexifying it and making it look three-dimensional. So far so good. Again, we do need to let that dry. And I think in the meantime, we are going to wash this brush, that way it doesn't end up hardening, condensing those bristles. Wipe that off on a little paper towel, painting cloth. And then I like to continue drying it with my fingers. And this won't be perfectly dry yet, but it'll be well on its way, and then I just take my hand and I work my fingers back and forth with the bristles in between to separate and open them back up again. You want to be gentle enough with it, but this is a great way of getting your brush back into working shape after a little wash. And I say wash, I did put this in diluted water, so there is little bits of paint in the water that we just used. So this isn't properly washed. I will wash this well before we finish our painting session, but for now this is fine. That said, I like this. Part of me doesn't want to waste the green that we have on here, but I want to add some highlights to the ground that we have as well. So you know what, we'll keep the green that we have. We'll incorporate it into a little bit of this Cad Orange, Oxide Black, Titanium White. We can see the old color for the ground right there. So this is much brighter, and I'm going to keep this mix inconsistent. So you have darker areas, more orange, brighter but desaturated. Make it much, much more interesting. Then we'll take our liner, little bits of this. Start tapping it in. To add some variance. And these are just taps. It's not really a drag at any point until we get to the foreground, at which point I might do little horizontal movements with slight curvature. I think I want to make this actually a bit brighter. I'm only going to add light slowly, because this could very quickly become pretty powerful. There we go. Beautiful. Little taps here and there. That's what we're looking for. Nothing too stark. Nothing overly dramatic, but that good feel. Maybe a bit of extra light towards the back, as that is where the light is going to work its way from. And just like that, I think we find ourselves with a much more natural, realistic looking space. You don't have to do a lot, and we really didn't. I might add a little bit more titanium white. Go back in. Just do a couple more little intricacies. Now, this is great, and it's what we want to be doing, but we can probably use this color for the actual trees in the background, because realistically the ones farthest away, the ones that are really behind here, are going to be getting a lot of this warm light wrapping around them, and they might even get lost in the light. So we don't really see their innate coloring, we see this more orangey hue. Let me just quickly grab the reference photo, make sure that I am in fact working in the right direction with this, but I'm pretty confident we will have what we need here. So at this point I'm just doing a little scroll. I admittedly don't really I'm not great with technology, I'm not great with my phone. Sometimes I find it hard to, once I download something, to find it again, which is my current predicament. And oh, there we go. Okay, so that's our reference photo. So you can see these trees are very different from these trees. These ones are much more orange, and that's something we could do. Now, there isn't a drawing on the canvas right now. You could go back over to Patreon and you could look at the traceable, resketch that on in the way that we had it. I really liked the general design that we had. I think it was well balanced. There was a lot of intentionality behind it. If you watched the real-time sketching video, you'll see just how we planned everything out and why we added the leans that we did, the little movements. There's a lot to painting trees. It's not just a straight line. But I think for the sake of fun, I'm going to try to reconstruct this a little bit differently with the same idea. So if you want it perfect, use the traceable up over on Patreon. If you'd like to freestyle it with me, you are more than welcome to do so. But I also find, because I already did do this sketch and I talked about it while I did it, I have a pretty good understanding of what I want to do, and it gives me makes freestyling it a lot easier, right? Because I've already done it, I've already put a lot of thought into it. With that, we are going to make a bit more of an orange mixture here, like so. I'm going to take the larger flat-headed brush, and we are going to have this starting right behind our grass, and I'm going to work this up. You can see that I'm not making one elongated marking. I'm making lots of combined markings, and that's very intentional because this is going to make it look a lot more natural. You want the little hard start and stops, the unique edges. That adds a lot to it. Now we'll add a second set of branches moving up here, and these are just the large ones. These are more foundational than anything, but the idea is that branches are always bigger towards the bottom, but more time to grow, to establish themselves. I always like to start by making them really small, and then I go back and I make them bigger slowly. Like so. It just gives you more control in the process. But we will add lots of little branches to this. I'm going to try to keep the mid section open so that we can have this canopying tree effect. But I think this is a good start. We're going to go over to this side. Again, starting with very small applications, which we know we will build, but for now, we'll take this really easy, like that. I don't want to do this exact same thing over here, but I will do one very close to it. So it has a similar idea, it balances it well without feeling like a direct copy, which is something you really do want to avoid with trees. It's one of those things where you might think, oh, there are only so many ways of making that original, but there are so many ways of making it original. Even something that's a bit more straight like this looks quite unique next to the other two, right? And that's an important thing to think about. Now we're going to do another over here. If you add more water to your brush, this gets infinitely easier. But your pigment is thin, so you'll have to go back over it a couple of times probably. Now I'm going and making it thicker. Trying to leave all of those unique movements. So far, so good. Thinking about how we expand. I think I'm going to do a little tree which crosses over here and then out this way. And we're doing this because we want a lot of our trees and branches to push this way and this way, but if we have all of them do that, it starts to look really unnatural. So by having one that's actively going against that general movement, it retains a lot of the believability of the scene. Here's another one, but on a slightly different angle. Now you can see we're really complexifying this edge. All things we want to do. It's also worth noting that you don't want to create the spacing in between all of your trees to be the same. You can see how that's really small. This is a little bit bigger. This is bigger than this. Because we have these two so close, the next one over here, I probably want a bit farther. And we talk about this at a great length in the actual traceable drawing video, but it's a little crash course now for you. And maybe the tree starts to break. We need a different angle than this trajectory. And we also need to be careful when we start to run out of pigment that we don't get a scratchy looking area. If we accidentally make our tree too big, like this, we have the option of making the entirety of the tree bigger, or we can cover it with foliage. I'm going to opt to make the entirety of the tree bigger. Now why would I do that? Because we have a lot of really small trees in this area, and creating variation via size is also a great way of making it more diverse, but because it's going to be so much bigger, I'm actually going to move this into the foreground. So you can see it now works its way there. I think we do incorporate a split. Because it's closer, we can see more details. Here's another split. Good. Now maybe we go back behind it and we go a little closer. And it also splits, but it splits really early on. And one side goes off the edge, and the other one finds its way up. Gets really tight, really close to this. And then she just finds her way to the top. Very natural looking so far. That is the primary goal. Let's keep it natural by having this move in the direction that we don't really want it to go for the sake of the general movement, but we'll make it more believable. Good. We're not done. We're not done. We've got a lot to do. Beautiful. Beautiful. And this brush eventually will be too big for the branches that we want to create, but we're not there yet. So we're just going to keep on keeping on. Okay. Try to create different angles for all of these. Sometimes I'll be successful, sometimes I won't, and when I'm not, I will just try to change it a little bit later in the process, adding a different branch to make it more interesting, or just doing something to change it up. Play with the size, maybe do a little break off, a split in one way or another. It's okay if your branches overlap, and in fact it makes it stronger as a painting. And then I think I'm going to put one on the very edge to frame the painting a little bit. Don't know how much of this we'll actually see, but subconsciously I think it'll do a good job of keeping the eye in the painting. There we go. Now this side is very much void of any real detail, so I think it's time we start playing with this a bit more. That's really what we're doing. We're just playing with our subjects. I like that. I think it's time we mix up more pigment, and I'm going to mix up more of a very similar pigment because realistically, we like what we have. We can double down. And then have this work its way through these. And ask ourselves how obvious we want this opening to be. It can be subtle, or it can be quite direct and intentional. And the more I do, the more I'm leaning towards direct and intentional. Something a bit dramatic. You immediately notice it. I feel like a lot of my words are sounding very playful today. Unintentionally so. I find ever since I got Invisalign, I don't know what it is, but there are some days, right? Almost it's like you feel the Invisalign in your mouth, and then you end up talking a little different. A little bit of a lisp. Which, you know, originally was something I was mildly concerned about with making these videos, because I want to make them pleasant, I want to make them professional. And then eventually I realized, you know what, no, that's human, that's all of us, that's okay. So, now we just can kind of laugh about it together. There we go. For the record, if anybody's ever thought about getting Invisalign, I can attest to the fact that it was fantastic for me. I feel like it moved everything around in the way that I wanted it to, and never really hurt badly. Granted, I feel like I have a great dentist who I very much appreciate, but you know, it was a very positive experience. Despite the fact that occasionally, again, there's a little bit of a lisp. Not a big deal. Not a bad trade. This is really fun. I might leave one of the sides a bit more open than the other. Beautiful. Beautiful. I'm not sure if you just heard my knee crack, but one of those days. My partner and I, today we went out to grab a piece of furniture from Facebook Marketplace, and we thought they would be relatively light, but with that in mind, we decided, oh, well, we'll take the subway. We'll just, keep it easy. We'll each grab one, we'll each carry one. They're tall, but they're made of seemingly bamboo, and therefore quite light in theory. And we get there, and we look at them, and it's like, oh, these are nice, I like that. But then you go to pick it up, and you say, oh, well, there's some real wood in here. You never really expect there to be real wooden furniture anymore, right? But there was a lot of real wood, and that real wood came with some weight. And so we thought getting it home might be a 45-minute excursion on public transit. However, because of how we had to carry them, which was together for each of them, and essentially we'd both pick up half, and then we'd move it 10 feet, and then we'd go back and we'd grab the other one, and then move that up 10 feet to where the other one was. Doing that myriad of times took about 3 hours. And in the process, the body said, what are you doing to me? Why are we endeavoring into this in such a way? So it was an interesting morning. In the end, we got the furniture. We're very happy with it. It's great storage for potential art supplies and filming equipment. I think the bottom shelf is already designated for colored pencils, so that's fun. But again, quite the excursion, and now we feel it. That's okay. Came with a funny story. But yeah, you just really don't expect things to be made with real wood anymore. I stand by that. Grateful it was, but kind of fun, kind of funny. Okay, do we want another one working this way? I think we do, but I think I want to do it with a different brush. So I'm going to put this down. Might get I'm going to have a water break, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so we are back from our little break. I'm going to mix up a bit more of the pigment we were already working with, because again, I want it to be consistent, I want it to feel good, though, you know what I should note, you can have this be somewhat inconsistent. The more mild inconsistencies in it, the more natural it will look, because the bark will differ from tree to tree for myriad of reasons, but we will expand upon the palettes of this in a later step pretty soon. This is just really about getting the bases in and figuring out how we want our trees to look. That said, here, as you can see, we're going in with a liner brush now, and that's helping us create far smaller markings that should allow us to expand in fun ways. You can see I'm going back and forth with a lot of these. This is pretty watery, so I'm going to be careful with it. There's always a delicate blend of just the right amount of water. Too much and it becomes large and difficult to work with, but too little and you don't have the movements that you want. So there's an in-between. We are actively working to find it with every application. And here I'm just looking for areas that we can fit these little movements without kind of copying other movements in the area. That's really the one thing I'm considering. I don't really care too much if we overlap other branches or things become a little visually complex. I just don't want to do the same thing over and over again. So maybe we go up on an angle and then it goes straight. I feel like we haven't done that for a little while. I feel like maybe there's just one that goes off to the side here. That's interesting. And over here we have a lot of room for unique movements. Maybe it's taking a hard left and a hard right. This all meets in the middle. Once we add foliage, it will also change the aesthetic pretty dramatically. But for now, I actually really like what we have going on here. Maybe we take one of these and we move it in front of the others for the sake of creating more depth. Maybe we have another one that's down here and it works its way up like that. Definitely more believable when we have them here as well. Maybe this one just by a little bit. Not as far down as that. You want there to be a progression, always. There we go. I like that a lot. Okay. I feel like it looks like it's getting a little darker. I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but it's only about 4 p.m. and the sun's been setting lately around 9. So perhaps just clouds that I cannot see. Talk about this in every lesson, but you know, it is nice when you have semi-cloudy days while you paint, because you get to see what your painting looks like on sunny days and cloudy days at the same time, and then adjust however you'd like to. I often advise, if you are going to put the painting in an area that's going to receive a lot of natural light, to almost paint it for the most common lighting that you receive. So if you live in an area that's very rainy or snowy, then you probably paint it a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated to compensate for that setting. If you are in a place that's almost always very sunny, you might want to paint it a little bit more dull, because it's going to have all this added warmth and saturation on it anyway, just from its natural surroundings. You don't have to. It's just a thought. When I was in high school, I was working on a painting, worked on it overnight, all-nighter. You know, one of those situations where it's due the next day, and it's not that you didn't want to paint it beforehand, it's just that, for me at least, I feel like I would get a class assignment for art, and then I would find 100 ways to complicate it, and I'd do it on a much bigger canvas than is advised, and I'd use new mediums, and I'd really just try to explore and do my best. But because of that, things would often take a lot longer than they should. And so, you know, it was an all-nighter, and I was really happy with the painting. I loved how it turned out. I was really proud, ready to take it into school, and then I remember taking it outside to take it to school, and the painting looked completely different than what I thought it looked like. And that was because I was painting with a warm light in my bedroom, and that warm light was not reflective of what natural light looked like at all. So the painting was actually much cooler than I thought. And, you know, to make it warmer again, you'd have to do a glaze or repaint a great deal of it. I learned to love it as a slightly cooler painting, but it just goes to show that the lighting in which you are painting in has a big impact on how your painting actually looks, and being mindful of that is important. Let's do that. Another one there. I think we've been painting branches for 25 minutes, but you know what? It's been a very fun 25 minutes. All of which enjoyable. go. This is good. This is good. I think these little branches are the ones that make it feel really special. And feeling at the end of the day is the most important part of any painting, in my opinion. There. Okay. So we could definitely do more branches. We could definitely expand upon this. But I think right now I actually want to start building on the trees, adding textures, adding volume, start really bringing them to life. So I'm going to swap the camera battery, that way it does not die on us as we are painting, and then we're going to jump into the next step. Okay, so yet again, we are back. This is dried for the most part, but that's okay because we're moving on to the next step, and these are all also pretty much dry. Now, what we want to consider is where the light's coming from, and in this case it's from the back to a point, but it's soft light. In the reference photo it was hard light and you had these really dramatic shadows. I think for this, because it's a soft summer scene, because we want it to feel serene, we are going to have it be a bit softer, though we are going to still have some light wrap around. And that means I think the backs of all of these trees, and by backs I mean the area that's facing us actually, they're going to be a bit darker, and then as we move towards the sides, it's going to progressively get lighter and lighter because the light from back here is going to wrap around the sides and then towards the back again. It won't really be able to face it. It will be darker. We'll have that three-dimensional effect. And that means we can start with the shadows or the highlights. I am going to start with the shadows because we want to be able to layer the highlights on top, and it'll look really awkward if we have shadows working their way accidentally into the highlights, where it won't look awkward if we layer the highlights into the shadows. So, all of that in mind, we're working on a darker version of our trees. You can see, just going to do that quite simply. I'm going to pick the biggest tree because it's the easiest to work and figure out. We're going to work this up. Our branches, we're trying to keep it in the middle. It will get lighter as we move towards the top because the light will have an easier time wrapping around the subject. I'm also okay if my application looks a little chalky, a little toothy. You can see the tooth of the canvas showing through because that's just easy extra texture within the painting. So you can see that I'm moving it about and I'm blending it, but the brush is almost dry, so I'm not getting a wet soft blend, I'm getting a rough one, and I really like that for that type of subject in that setting. As we get a little bit farther away, we might make it a bit more wet, have it be a bit more smooth, because you won't see detail like that the farther away you get. Now, because we're working on the left-hand side of the canvas, I'm applying the shadow to the back, but more so towards the left-hand side of the back, because the light's moving this way, and that's just the area that's going to receive the most. We can throw this onto the side as a whole, create a really nice vignette effect. A little bit towards here. Not all the trees are going to have it, especially the ones that are farthest away. So this one probably won't really have much, maybe just a hint. And that's great because the majority of our pigment we used elsewhere, and then it's a lot softer right there. Again, we can grab this, and there's a lot on this tree because it's closest to us. Less and less as we get towards the top. Go back for a rough blend. And then this tree's pretty big, so it'll probably have some towards the back. This is going really smoothly. Love when it just works out, you know? Not too tricky. Not too tricky at all. Okay, now from here we have quite a few options how we want to go about this. We could interject additional texture and shadows, or we could jump straight into highlights. And I think I'm actually going to opt for slightly more shadow, just to make it a little more pronounced. So we'll add extra Oxide Black, a little extra Cad Orange, which will also brighten it just a hint. We'll add this towards the base of the ones that are closest to us. This will be darker than our previous mixes, which is nice. Just creates a bit more depth. The more value range you have, the more depth you typically have. We'll go a little bit darker yet again. Doing this very slowly, progressively. Don't need to do too much in any one of these areas. There we go. Just tapping on some texture. Honestly, great start. I don't have much pigment left, so I can just do the areas that aren't going to be that dark, that are a little softer, but that are pretty big up here, and we'll have a little bit of a wraparound. Typically, I wait to do these areas till I have almost no pigment left on my brush. Just like that, they too are now three-dimensional in the way that we need them to be. Okay, so we don't really want to apply the highlights while that's still wet, because if we do, we are going to be mixing a lot of blacks and whites, which will render grays, where we might want something a little more warm. So I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to clean it. While we do, this will dry, and hopefully by the time we mix our new pigment and we go in, it should be just about ready. So, brush is fairly clean. We are mixing a nice Cad Orange, bright brown, a little bit of our past mix in here, make it cohesive. And that might be a little much. It's okay though, we can just do the mix, but bigger. I like that. It also doesn't have to be perfectly blended. This is another realm where variance can aid the painting. And with that, now we're going to take the liner and start working this on the sides that are going to be receiving the most light. I'm going to try not to do one elongated line. I'm going to try to do lots of little taps and drags to continue the more unique, playful motions of the tree. Because this pigment is pretty close to that of the sky through here, when you apply it in this area, it might get lost in the sky. Don't feel like you have to adjust for that. It's really not a bad thing at all. You can see down here, that looks great. We can do lots of little taps because we're close to us. We'll see more details in the bark. Beautiful. Through here as well. Beautiful. Down towards the bottom. Just building textures. It's very watery right now, so all of the marks I make are going to dry a little bit darker, and that gives me the freedom to work in the really dark areas with these highlights, knowing that they're not going to be that bright later on. So we just have a bit more freedom to be playful. Now I'm applying this predominantly to the right-hand side of these trees, because the light is going to hit predominantly from there with the way we've set it up. We can work this onto even the little branches, give them some extra character. We'll go about the other side a bit differently, but it'll follow the same rule set. And I'll explain what I mean when we get there, but for now we're just kind of having fun, working our way down these as a whole. Okay, head on over to the other side. Lots of little taps and drags. Beautiful. Okay. Now here, as you can see, again different in that we're painting on the left-hand side of the branches because the light's going to be hitting it from the different angle. So we're just assuming that, well, you can't really see it, that there's a bit more light coming from the center, so it goes that way and that way. And we're basing our highlights off of that idea. We can go a lot brighter with our highlights. I think we do right now. The more variance in value that you have, again, the more depth you'll create. So you don't have to go to this bright this quickly. Doing so more for the sake of time and you being able to watch this lesson this weekend. But you can take longer. Don't feel like you have to rush it. Don't feel like you have to jump to very dramatic variances. Though I do think this is a good jump, what I have here. And I don't think it suffered at all. It's just one of those situations where most paintings can look a little bit better if you just do more layers, if you just have more variance, if you just work on a slightly bigger canvas, that kind of rule set, right? Not always true, but for the most part. There we go. We can bring these highlights up even into the top because this is a lot brighter than the branches that we had up here. Though it's also okay if the top branches visually are a bit more simple in their values and their color, because more light will wrap around them and they will just simply have less variance. It's not actually a bad thing. There we go. getting a little quiet through this, I know. I'm just really enjoying the process. Thinking about a lot of past beach days. Good memories. Went down to the sandbanks last year in Ontario. And if you haven't been, the sandbanks are pretty spectacular. Great for swimming. Incredibly large beaches. You can always find a good spot. But you also do have these massive sand dunes which you can run or roll down, and just makes you feel playful. Makes you feel young. But thinking a lot about that. Place that makes you happy. It's often the goal with these paintings. Bring you to a place mentally that makes you happy, right? There we go. Now we can continue doing this for a very long period of time, just adding these little highlights and shadows, textures. But we do need to add foliage, right? These are canopying trees, they're healthy trees. We need to move the greens from the bottom into the top. We also need to go back to the bottom and add in added highlights. But I think at this point we take a little break from doing what we're doing here and we add some greenery up there. With that, I'm going to clean my brushes, I'm going to clean my water, and then we're going to come back with some greens. Okay, so we're back. We have clean brushes, clean water, and we're about to jump into the background and these wonderful highlights. So we are going to begin with, I think, the highlights for the background. And you know what? No, let's start with a mid value, and then we can work the dark value on it, and then we can work the highlights on it for top that. Yeah, I think that's the most consistent way of going about this. So again, mid value green. We have a really nice green down here that we liked as a mid value. So you know what? This is going to be very easy. We just look at what we had on our palette before, which is a lot of sap green. I think about a third amount of our cad orange, a lot of titanium white. Trying to leave a bit of the green still here on the palette so we can use it as an example to mix to. And just like that, I think we're there. So I'm going to spread this out. I'm going to leave some of it slightly inconsistent, some areas a little more green, some a little more orange, just for variance in the actual foliage. And then we're going to grab our fan brush. Now, this is an interesting fan brush in that, again, when it's dry, it's essentially a stiff bristled fan brush, but when we wet it, you see what happens, and I take the excess water off, it forks, and now it looks a lot more like a soft bristled fan brush. So for this application, I'd recommend using a soft bristled fan brush, not a stiff. And if you're working with my brush set, make sure that this brush is damp. That way it does fork like this. This will render a couple of different markings, and we can start to tap these in around the edges of branches, and then decide on the areas where we want a lot more foliage. And you can see that I'm just starting by tapping. Quite simple. We're going to build up, double down on the areas where we want it to be nice and thick. And I'm rotating my brush in the air so I get a different impression and marking on the canvas each time. But never am I rotating the brush while it's already on the canvas. Because if it's on the canvas and I rotate, then I get a streak, and that isn't what I'm looking for here. Applying a lot of this over our pre-existing trees. Not always. Sometimes I'm working around them, as you can see. But there are a lot where I am intentionally going over it, and that's because foliage doesn't just grow on the sides of trees and behind it, it also grows in front. So we're just being playful. Like so. Couple down towards the bottom. There's going to be less towards the bottom because there just won't be enough branches for foliage towards there. So for the most part, we're sticking higher up. There might be large trees you want to work around with a lot of these taps. This one, maybe this one, the ones that are closer to you, and then you'll be a bit more intentional with the foliage that you put over top of them, because the ones in the distance, ones that are a little bit farther away, are going to have a lot more foliage on top of them, because they'll just have more trees with foliage in front, where the ones that are close to us, they're not going to have all of those trees creating that opportunity for foliage. So you approach them slightly differently. Less is more is always a great way to start this, and then you go back to areas and you fill them out. We're also not doing all of our leaves with this, because we are going to be more intentional when we grab our liner brush, but we do want some. Here I am now going back over this tree, which is quite close to us. Not everywhere, probably the areas that I don't like the most. And it's okay to have those areas. It's okay to have favorite spots. It's okay to cover up the ones you don't really jive with that much. There we go. Honestly, really strong start. I like this a lot. Going to do a bit more foliage towards the top to create that canopying effect. There we go. Now we will simply make sure that this paint is still nice and wet. Switch on over to our liner brush. Grab some of this, and we can add the little individual pieces of greenery to our branches. Like so. Being quite delicate and careful. Really aiming to not overdo, because as noted, we can always go back and add more. You can also touch up areas over there. It doesn't just have to be in the central section. Be a bit more picky with how I cover the trees that are closest to us. There we go. Really liking how this is turning out. I like the colors, I like the movements, I like the feeling. Can do a couple just kind of flying off, create some additional movements within here. Kind of fun. So they don't always have to be connected to a branch. Sometimes the wind can take them and it can be a bit more playful. Probably don't want to do too many, but I think that right there is quite nice. And then we'll throw a couple in between these openings just to show that it isn't exclusively happening right there, right? There we go. Okay, great start. We'll clean this brush a little bit. Put that to the side. Grab our fan brush. Clean that a little bit, just to make sure that the pigment doesn't dry on it. This can be wet, again, with how we're applying. And then we're going to mix up a darker version of the green that we currently have. So I'm just going to add some extra Mars Black to it. Easy start. Maybe a little bit more green for the sake of keeping it saturated. We're mixing it right beside our past one, just that way we have that point of reference. slightly more green. There we go. That's beautiful. And we can apply this with the fan brush in the way that we did before. Do a little demo. Or you can apply these individually with your liner. But we do want variance. And this is predominantly going to be applied in the center of the larger clusters that you have, the areas that are a little too dense for light to wrap around or work through, and therefore they receive these darker shadows on the leaves. These are great for vignettes, so your top corners will probably really aid in being worked with them. Maybe down here a little bit, the sides, the corners. You want to be careful with it as you get towards the center of the painting. And with that, I might switch on over to the liner brush, have more intentionality, trying to randomize these applications quite a lot. There we go. So far, so good. So far, so good. Work that up here. Back. Keep it flowing, keep your movements dynamic. I think it's easy to create just this larger arch, but you do want to jump back and forth and find other little clusters and movements within it, right? You have your primary flow, but then you have micro flows. That's flowing up through there, find its way up there. Not every cluster needs to connect to other ones either. It's okay to have individualized spaces. So far, so good. Wonderful. Nice and easy. Nice and easy. Okay. So at this point we probably likely start to relax with the shadows. Though actually before I do, it's worth noting that you can make a much more watery version of this. Go into the areas where you do have shadows and then make a slightly lighter shadow, so there's slight variance in your shadows as well. And that can be really nice because you don't have to mix the pigment to get a different value. You can just thin it a lot with water. Create some extra depth, some extra layers of foliage. That's not what I'm doing right now. Little step, don't need to do a lot of it, but it does help. Bridge these together well. Good. 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 think we're ready for the next step, but I do want this to dry. So again, this is your friendly reminder for a little water break. Stay healthy, stay hydrated. It'll keep your hand a little bit more steady. It'll keep your mental a bit more happy. And just good things to do in general. With that, I will see you after my own little water break. Okay, so at this point, we are ready for our highlights, and that begins quite simply with about an equal mixture of Sap Green, Titanium White, a little bit of our Cadmium Orange. Still need that to be nice and warm because it is a highlight. This is the area that has all of the background light working through it. So it is green, but it's also orange, and that's a beautiful color right there. Now for the actual application process, we are going to grab our fan brush for the first time in a while because we still need to add highlights to the grass down here, and this is a great way of bridging the top and the bottom. So we'll just start, say, by throwing this in, but to be honest, this is so similar to what we had, it's not really making any dramatic difference. We can place it above our trees just a little bit to bring those into the scene appropriately, but really for the most part I think we need to go a lot brighter to build that in the way that we need. So instead, I'm going to put this in here for now. We're going to see if it's bright enough for what we want to do in this foliage. And you know what? I think it needs to be brighter there too. We don't always mix the color perfectly the first time, and that's okay. We'll just head back to the palette, add some extra titanium white. It'll desaturate it to a point, but that's fine. That is a-okay. That's nice too. Now we apply this even brighter variant. I think there's a world where we actually grab some cadmium yellow deep hue. It wasn't a color that I initially intended to work into the painting, but now looking at it, I think it could help a lot. So I'm going to go grab that. I'm going to dry my fan brush, and then we'll continue working on this with something nice and warm. Okay, so we're back. We have a Winsor & Newton cadmium yellow deep hue, which we'll apply to the palette right here. Very good. And we'll use this to make much brighter, more saturated, warm yellowish greens. Now we can probably just take this and interject it into the mix that we had. Add a little more orange, add a little more green, a little more yellow. I think that looks quite nice. Let's give it a try. Still not that bright, but it might show up a bit better because of the yellow, and it does a little bit. It's definitely a step in the right direction. Let's go more titanium white, more yellow, like so. We're just going to try a couple different variants of this. Again, yellow wasn't initially part of the plan, the palette. It's also worth noting that where I'm applying this is predominantly towards the edges of the open foliage because that's where light will wrap around for the most part. You can definitely also do it in the open areas too. And there can be little areas that protrude out over the shadows, so you might want to do it here and there. But for the most part, you're looking for the edges of clusters because they will have the most light within that realm. Definitely do a lot up here. And I think, while I really like how this is going and while it's quite effective, I'm probably going to switch over to the liner brush to make sure that this is abundant enough and randomized enough as well. It's fun to paint all of these on individually and have that control, but sometimes when you have too much control, you start creating things that are all very visually similar to the point where they're a little unrealistic, and it doesn't happen intentionally, it's typically a subconscious thing. But just for the sake of avoiding that, let's go back to our mix, keep it alive, a little bit more yellow, a little bit more titanium white, maybe even a little bit more water. Switch back to the liner, or the fan, rather. We're going to make it nice and damp. That way it forks appropriately. Grab that. Going to be careful not to overdo this, but I already really like the inclusion, so we can do a good bit of it. Remember, we're rotating our brush in the air, not on the canvas. We're just building out our areas of foliage. There we go. Okay, I think that actually looks a lot better. Very happy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to clean this brush. We're going to dry it quite well. Take off all of the excess pigment, take off all the excess water. Then fan out the fan brush so you have all those sharp markings. We'll even out our paint right here. And then we will yet again reattempt the grass. This will predominantly be towards the edge to begin with. Then we'll slowly work our way inwards, hoping that the pigment will begin to run out as we get towards this midsection. And that way we get a gradient of light where the areas that are closest to the edge and the water are brighter. And then as we naturally get farther away from the light, the highlights naturally dissipate. Good, so far so good. And go back into the background with multiple taps, closing the gaps. Creating more variance. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Okay. Love when we go in with a plan and it works as smoothly as it did. Now we'll grab our liner. And we'll grab a little bit of this, do some individual strokes here and there. Nothing too dramatic necessary. Little bits flying off. Good. More highlight. More fan brush. You can see how value-wise it almost works its way into the water. I love that. Creates that softer transition from one subject to the next. Creates additional values and transitions. That looks pretty good. But it does look a little uniform. So, back to the liner. Okay, now, I think what we'll do is we'll implement some rocks using our Oxide Black, Cad Orange, maybe a little bit of that yellow. We'll make some of it brighter with a titanium white and more orange. And we'll make some of it darker with an Oxide Black. Have a bit of a range. We can create some rocks that kind of break up different patches of grass, and I'm starting with the darker values. Starting with the darker values. There we go. Good little collection of them. Try and make all of the rocks different from the ones they're next to. So this one's a little more flat, this one's a little more triangular, this one's a little more rounded, this one's the biggest and a combination of flat and triangular. I can do some little ones in the background there. Some really tiny ones through there. There we go. Now we can grab the highlight that we painted, that we mixed. Start applying that to the tops of the rocks. Because it's still wet, it should blend pretty easy. But these rocks will have a very similar palette to the trees, which is nice. Though it won't stand out too much, but they will add an extra level of interest. We can make an even brighter version. More orange, more titanium white. So far, so good. Okay. Now little taps to further brighten the path, because you've been brightening the grass and we need to brighten the path along with it to a point. That way it all feels cohesive. There we go. Love how this is turning out. Maybe we also use this for some bonus tree branches. It's not too late to add more. It's not too late to add more foliage. It's not too late to build in really any direction you want. If we do that though, we do need to make a darker version for the inside of the application. That way it's reminiscent of our other trees and branches. And we also need to add the lighter edge too. Very fun. Now we'll get a little closer for the first time in a while, grab some more of this, and maybe break up this opening just a little bit. Try to get really sharp, tiny markings that we can then put foliage on after. But I'm just trying to make this feel a little more unique. I wanted this big opening, and I still do, but I don't want it to be too perfect. Maybe if they feel like they're reaching for each other, that's kind of interesting. A little bit of storytelling in the piece, right? Okay. Now again, we need the highlight for the edge. And something akin to it. Then we need some green. There we go. After stepping back, I feel like we can do even more branches that kind of playfully work their way into the center there. These are the ones that really make this into the painting that we were excited about. Can't overdo it, but there's definitely room to play. There we go. Just the more we can expand, the better it'll get. A little more foreground action. We'll leave this one a little bit darker maybe, because it is back here. Maybe we do a sister tree for it. Something following that general movement and that general area and that general size, but not the same, just enough to validate how this one looks. That said, I really love this. I think that's beautiful. I think even if we didn't have this, this would be great. It's the little ones now. We can make the value a little bit darker because we're getting closer to us. There we go. And I think maybe we do one from here, the true foreground. And this is pretty far back, so it won't really be receiving much light, if any. Okay, I like that a lot. Lots of focus at this point. Just micro adjustments, micro additions. We'll add one of these just horizontally, keeping the eye moving out of there. We'll have it come back down. Then maybe another one working its way here. Yeah. Starting to take a lot of artistic liberties. But if you know me, you know I love those artistic liberties. I feel like you really figure out paintings as you work on them. And you don't really know what they're going to look like, what they should look like, until you get towards the end of it, and then you can make a lot of big fun changes. Here I'm adding some of the darker values from these into the rocks in the back, just further building our value sets, which is also great because it's going to make these trees look farther in front, like they have more light in them. Same goes for the rocks. Here we're just doing a couple little taps down here as well. We can do little blades of grass with the darker values, add to the vignetting. Yeah, maybe a little bit of a highlight on the sides of the areas that could get a little bit of light, not a lot. We'll be very careful with this. And typically I don't mix with the liner brush. You probably would see me do quite a bit here, but that's just because we're doing very small amounts, not particularly large areas. And here you can see we're adding on that highlight, but because it's so far back, it's a very subtle highlight. It's blending into the darker pigment that we have, and that's okay. It's actually ideal right through here. Okay, so I took a couple steps back, gave it a good look, and I have to say, I am very, very happy with how this is turning out. I think we are almost there. I think there are a couple little things we can do. We did add a lot of these extra baby branches. They could use some foliage, so I think we'll add that in. But it's been really, really nice to watch this evolve. I think we did get to that real summer feeling. That was the primary goal in the beginning. Something that kind of transports us into that warm, kind of daisy state. And I think we can also do some of these down here, but because they're so close to us, they'd be much bigger. So you're doing these big rounded applications. There we go. Also, as we do near the end of this, I would like to, as per usual, say a big, big thank you to everybody who is supporting the channel directly, making these lessons happen. We do see you up over on Patreon, and there are quite a number of you who have been supporting the channel from the start. We've been doing this for a long, long time, and it's really cool to still see those names. It's really cool to see all of the new names as well. Nice to know that the community is still growing, and just want to say a big thank you to everybody who does make these lessons happen. There's a lot of pre-planning into figuring out the palettes and the compositions and how we're going to go about layering and just building this out. And you know, if it wasn't for you and that support, I wouldn't be able to put the time into it that I do to make these longer lessons. So thank you. Very, very directly thank you. I want you to know that you are helping keep traditional art around and alive on the channel. I want you to know that you are helping to get these made so that other people can watch and they can also learn how to paint and make art. I want you to know that you're making an impact in my life as well. So thank you for all of those reasons. I hope this is one that inspired you, that made you feel good, that excited you to pick up the brush. Though I do know quite a number of you just watch these for the sake of relaxing, which is quite nice as well. And again, if that's the case, I hope you feel quite relaxed. For those of you who may be new here and you made it to the end, congratulations. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. I will let you know that in the future you can watch these videos ad-free up over on Patreon. When I upload the lesson to YouTube here, I also upload it to Patreon, and I make sure that one doesn't have any ads at all. Up there you can also get the real-time video where I'm sketching it on the canvas. You can also get the video where I break down the color palette and we decide on the color palette. So I take the reference photo, I open in Photoshop, we go over all of the different color options, and then we build the palette together. You can also watch our exclusive Patreon bonus series. Right now, we're working on this one right here. Not done, but we're doing a lot with it. I'm going to try to get the green tape off of my hand that I have on the back there. But you can also get a bunch of fun things like all of my ebooks. I have an ebook called Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials. Teaches you everything that you need to know about acrylic painting. And that is up there. There are a bunch of ebooks full of traceables for the uninspired days. You can get access to our Facebook group where members of the community share their artwork, and you are welcome to share your artwork. Always fun to see the different iterations of these and the artistic liberties that are taken. Friendly reminder that while this is a lesson and while I'm trying to teach you how to do this, you are always welcome to make it your own and go off in your own direction and interject colors and subjects that inspire you particularly. You don't have to follow these exactly. They're meant to help guide you, and they don't have to be exact. And I actually love when I find different iterations of these paintings that have unique touches. So feel welcome to be yourself in the painting process. Feel welcome to be unique. I love seeing that in the community. But I also love seeing just great iterations of these. So, you know, paint how you'd like to paint. Follow the lessons how you'd like to follow the lessons. There we go. Oh, this is so much fun. It's really hard for me to put the brush down once I start. If you've been following along for a while, you know that. This is just kind of a never-ending journey of continuing to add details and correct little things and build out. I really like the little guys we added at the end towards the bottom. I think they really create this neat opening that we had to a point before, but it wasn't this solidified. And I like the added depth we have now that trees are far away and close up, right? I might add another little one over here because these two are pretty much the same size. I'm going to go at a different distance and we'll just make a smaller one. Maybe grab a little bit of highlight, just a little bit. Grab a little bit of highlight for over here too. There we are. Very fun. Add some shadows back into the highlights at the top if they get a little too overabundant. You can always just go back and forth in your painting until you have exactly what you want. Part of me is thinking about doing one more right through here, but I don't want to overdo it. I think that's one where I look at the painting for a week and then I come back to it if I feel like it should be there, but I'm going to think about it. For me, my paintings don't typically end the day I put the brush down. It's one of those things where I might go back a year later and I say, you know what? I want that subject in there too, or I want to take that out. And that's okay too. Paintings, I think it's a lot easier to paint when you know you don't have a definitive endpoint. You can create and create until you're happy with it, and then if one day you say, you know what, it could use something else, and you go back and you do something to it then. As long as you aren't getting rid of it or selling it, then you can kind of work on them without that stress and that pressure. And I also like to dance between paintings, which I also advise, you know, move with the passion. Do finish the paintings. Do try to do that. That's a good skill. Some of us can kind of get out of the habit of, but do try to finish these at some point. But don't worry too much about when that actually is, right? That said, I really, really like this painting. I hope you do too. I hope you had fun. I hope you feel relaxed. I thank you for being here. I thank you for watching this, for listening to me paint, talk, do all of it. This is a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. And I am making many more of these in the near future. So if you haven't already, do subscribe to the channel, and in the comments, if you made it this far, let me know what you'd like to see in an upcoming lesson. On the channel here, for the most part, we do work on landscapes, but I am open to doing other things too, and I have an open mind. I'm excited to hear what you think, and again, as always, just thank you for being here. You take care, you be well, and above all, as always, stay creative.